It shows you how unpainful that vaccine shot is. So everybody go get your shot.
It works incredibly well, 95%, maybe even more than that. It works incredibly well, and I would recommend it to a lot of people that don't want to get it, and a lot of those people voted for me, frankly. But, you know, it's a great vaccine, it's a safe vaccine, and it's something that works.
I recommend you take it.
When you have the vaccine, people that do, and it's a very small number relatively, but people that do get it get better much quicker. That's a very important thing to know.
I recommend take the vaccines. I did it. It's good. Take the vaccines. But no, that's okay. That's all right. You're playing right into their hands when you sort of like, oh, the vaccine. If you don't want to take it, you shouldn't be forced to take it. No mandates. But take credit because we saved tens of millions of lives. Take credit. Don't let them take that away from you.
Both the president and I are vaxxed. And did you get the booster?
Yes.
I got it too. Okay, so...
Don't.
Trump said, I don't want to hear about questioning this so-called vaccine again. I call it a so-called vaccine. He said, I don't want to hear about this again from anybody.
I'm Frank Vaughn. It's July 21st, 2025, and we are embarking through Jeffrey Epstein and a number of other subjects, but mainly Epstein, in another episode of Being Gaslit by President Trump. And there are people who seek to justify the previous gaslighting. Most of them, I find it interesting, didn't take the medical experiment, didn't partake in it, risking assets, risking valuables, risking family. And here in Canada, we're going to cover something very specific to Canada because we set up, as opposed to having the companies that develop these products be liable for the damage that they caused, Canada, in its infinite wisdom, set up a taxpayer-funded board and organization that is supposed to compensate victims, people who have been destroyed by the medical experiments. However, as you're going to learn, it never pays out, and the companies, shielded from liability, never have to contribute money to it. The taxpayers are essentially bailing out the companies who have ruined all of these lives. But it's really important to remember, because people will often say, Trump didn't force anybody. He didn't support mandates. He supported freedom of choice. But you just heard him in his own words, recommending it. He's a powerful man. Millions of people follow him. And the fact is, Operation Warp Speed, which enabled the creation of these products and granted them to the market free from any liability for the damage that they cause, enabled Canada and the rest of the European world, the rest of the Western world, to implement draconian mandates and force people on pain of losing their jobs, losing their associations with their families, because we all went through it, watching their loved ones die alone in the dark, forcing them to make a choice between painful consequences and taking part in the medical experiment. Warp Speed underpinned all of it. It may not have happened to that extent in the United States, but what Trump authorized, and to this day has never apologized for, and in fact, in his public statements in the 2024 election, remains very proud of Warp Speed and what it brought to the world. That underpinned all of the draconian nonsense that we all had to go through. Now, there are those who would argue that Trump is playing 5D chess, and he's getting the Democrats to beg for the release of the Epstein files, and that the release, I've heard this, of the grand jury testimony is exactly what Trump wants. But a guy like Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz, says the grand jury testimony won't shed any light on the subject. It's just a sop. It's an attempt to get the American public to shut up about Epstein, his ties to Mossad and to the intelligence community, and the story of how a man with no formal education went from, first off, getting hired as a mathematician to a billionaire with his own jet. We need Maxwell. We need her testimony. We need perhaps the hours of footage that Steve Bannon is sitting on. Apparently interviewed Epstein for 12 hours. There are people out there who know where the bodies are buried, and there are people out there who know the full extent of the story, and there are those who will say it would bring down 2/3 of Congress, it would bring down global power elites, it would bring down the governments of the world, it would expose them for the dirty perverts they are. There was a story that was just recently released about one of the Koch brothers and the types of things that he, and this was mainstream press, got up to at Bohemian Grove. These people are weird. They're sick. They're not right. They're not like you and me. In politics and in society, in power games, the cream doesn't rise to the top. The cream sinks to the bottom and is locked out, and all that's at the top is the dirty, slicky oil that you can't eat. If you eat it, you get sick and you'll die as a decent person. That's what runs the world. That's why they can gaslight us. That's why they can lie to us. But this is about an ongoing story. Now, this is sad. This was 2 weeks ago. This piece of journalism. Only 4,000 views, less than I get on my channel, even though Global News has 4.75 million subscribers. Nobody watched this, but we're going to. Hang on, let's adjust the volume first.
I looked this morning. It still says I'm in the application phase.
Kayla Pollock has been waiting 3 years for her case to be assessed by the Vaccine Injury Support Program.
I haven't gotten even a message back saying we're looking at your file.
She is one of more than 1,700 injured people who are still in the queue.
I don't think they've even read my claim.
Kayla has a condition called transverse myelitis, a spinal cord disorder which has been documented after COVID vaccination.
I can't move my hand.
It was only days after her third shot the symptoms started. The searing pain followed a few weeks later.
From about here down, nothing moves and nothing works.
The Vaccine Injury Support Program, or VISP, is run by a private company called Oxaro. It bid on the lucrative government contract, promising speedy response times. But emails to the injured say,
not only did the government allow the companies that made this product, which didn't work, you heard the president say that it was 95% effective, repeating the talking points that were spoon-fed to us. And we had ample warning, and we knew it wasn't true, and those of us who made the ultimate sacrifice by not taking it, we've never had a single person, I know in my life, I've never had a single person apologize to me or tell me that I was right. There are people out there suffering with heart conditions now, myocarditis, it goes on and on. But the government didn't just outsource the liability. They aren't even managing the system. A private company is making money off the federal government to allow this woman and thousands like her, because in that 1,700 number that Global News is giving you, there are thousands and thousands more who have been disqualified or will not be heard because the system itself restricts who can get through the door. The door is very narrow, and there's a lot of damage that just can't even get a foot in the door. But if you're one of the lucky people, terrible choice of words, the 1,700 who got your foot through the door, you're just left in limbo while your life has been completely destroyed.
Due to an unexpectedly high volume of claims, VISP will respond
quarterly.
The forecast for that volume of claims was flawed from the start. The Public Health Agency of Canada, which oversees the program, estimated an average of 40 claims a year, with the potential for more in the first few years. That estimate was bumped up to 400 valid claims a year in the contract with Oxaro, but it was still off. Today, more than 3,000 people have applied in less than 4 years. Only 219 have been approved.
I absolutely believe that the program is a sham.
Jasmine Dea is a...
Seems pretty obvious that it's a sham. But the entire medical experiment was a sham. It didn't do anything for you. And even if it did, this thing that was promoted was about being a countermeasure to something that was little worse than a cold. It wasn't a pandemic. It looked like it might have been at the beginning, but it became fairly obvious in 2020, not in 2021, before they rolled this out. In 2020, by the summer, that it wasn't high lethality, that those who were dying from it had comorbidities and likely would have died anyway, would have died from the flu, would have died from the cold. The flu completely disappeared. It was like a miracle. Nobody was getting the flu anymore. Everybody was getting COVID-19. If you had a brain and you were thinking about it, you kind of could see what the game was. But even at that, the medical experiment, which they are still issuing boosters for to this day, it is still part of the vaccine schedule for little kids, doesn't do anything, doesn't protect you from anything. In fact, it renders you immunocompromised. We know that. It's part of the scientific literature. That's why I would be surprised to see a label affixed to this video by YouTube, because they've stopped labeling it as fake news. This would have got me banned 4 years ago, talking like this. And that's why I got to ask. Global News, they're doing a story now. Where were they? And you'll see it in the comments section too. But where were they? Where was the mainstream media? Where were the people asking critical questions? These people were actively involved in suppressing counter narratives and counter voices. And you know who else didn't let the Robert Malones have an audience, or any of the people like that? Donald Trump. He created this, folks. This is his legacy. Because if it wasn't for Project Warp Speed, the world, the Western world, wouldn't have had the very thing that all the draconian laws were based on, forcing people into this decision, which destroyed their lives. We've been gaslit before. Just like we are being gaslit about Jeffrey Epstein. Now, just some of the comments. This is a mainstream, and I actually applaud Global News for allowing comments, because CBC doesn't allow the community, the people who pay for CBC, that are forced at the barrel of a gun, because that's what government is when they extract taxation from you. It's a great big gun. Sure, it's legal. It's got all these words and apparatus, but it's enforced at the barrel of a gun. They take your money, they give it to CBC, and CBC doesn't even allow you to have a comment section because they're so cowardly. At least Global does that. They take government money too. Admittedly, it's far less, but they're state-funded media too, but at least they allow you a comment section. Due to an unexpectedly high volume of claims. Unexpected to who? Anybody that wasn't paying attention. This is unforgivable. It is, and it shouldn't be forgotten, just like Epstein should not be forgotten. We shouldn't move on from these things. The program was never meant to help anyone. True. But what program are you talking about? The one that compensates you for the damage, or the one that damaged you? Neither were ever intended to help you. They made tons of money for the makers of the medical experiment, who had no liability for the damage they caused, and they took it. Those psychopaths took it. The first clue something was wrong should have been when the manufacturers demanded immunity from prosecution. They didn't even just demand it. They were granted it in many cases by many nation-state actors, just given carte blanche. So the backlash of the V begins. I love my family, so none of us took the magical potion. I will never forgive or forget the way we were treated because of it. We were treated like criminals. And I would argue we're still being treated like criminals by some of the people who were supposed to love us. They trusted the state. They trusted irrational explanations about the efficacy of this thing. They denied that it would cause any harm. They lined up for it. Some of them are damaged. And even in spite of the fact that they're damaged, they still look down their noses at us who kept out of it. There are still jobs in Canada today that you can't get if you don't get the medical experiment. It's still ongoing. It hasn't stopped entirely. And the scary part is it could come back. People went along with this. They ostracized their family. We had a prime minister who asked the question of people like me, if our existence should be tolerated. Now, analytically, scientifically, it was more than possible to know in 2020, before the medical experiment was even being discussed, while the panic was still ongoing, it was possible to foresee that any medical experiment that jumped the queue and bypassed all the appropriate regulatory timetables was something that you could avoid, which is why even when I didn't know how deadly this pandemic was going to be, even when I was warning people to be cautious, I could say very firmly, and so could the people I brought on my show, people who worked in the industry, people who worked in virology, and they all said the same thing. If they rush out a product in the next year to 2 years, stay away from it. We won't be taking it. I could give that advice in 2020. Meanwhile, what was the president doing? He might not have been forcing you, but he was telling you that you should do it. And, likewise, his decision enabled the world to force this situation on us. This is his legacy too, and you shouldn't forget it. I know you're not supposed to say anything bad about the president. God, Emperor Trump. But I don't have that problem. So what's the point? The point is simply this. There are people out there, Q people, telling you to trust the plan. The storm is here. It's inevitable. You're going to get answers. Trust, enjoy the show. It's all pre-planned. Nonsense. They ignore the evidence of their eyes. Something's seemingly wrong at the heart of the Trump administration, and it has been for a while. He's just a human. Even if he's well-intentioned, he's capable of going off course. Project Warp Speed was massively off course. He created it, and then Biden inherited it. And the world did what it did with his creation, his legacy, something that he's still proud of. When it comes to Epstein, you shouldn't stop demanding answer. He really wants you to shut up about it, and you should be defying him. It's not just about grand jury testimony. It's about the truth, which you're not going to get from grand jury testimonies. That's a distraction. The client list is a distraction. It's the closure of the investigation. It's the lack of curiosity. That's the real story. When it comes to Ukraine and the escalation of the war, now they're talking about NATO troops on the ground, folks, under Trump's watch. Now, his talking point is he got them to commit to much higher defense spending to do what? Continue to prosecute the war in Ukraine, the one that he promised to end in a day? I know life sometimes proves to be more complicated than we like to think, and he's a blowhard, and he had to win an election and all these things, but why are we forgiving him so easily for backtracking on so many key campaign promises? We are expected to ignore a lot in order to maintain our myth of him being the savior, coming to liberate us all. Now, there are some silver linings, I suppose. But at this point, I think they're outnumbered. And I think people need to take a great big dose of reality and hold the administration's feet to the fire and hold the Republican Party's feet to the fire. Now, you might say, why are you talking about the United States so much when you've got a Canadian flag in the background? Look, folks, our government has reduced us to a nothing power. We're a nothing nation. We have no core identity. We have no national structure. All of our premiers and our leaders are running around having conferences, all within the framework of failure. The framework of failure being the Federation that we're all stuck living under. There isn't a single ounce of vision out there to do something different, to liberate the people. And the world doesn't give a damn about Canada except what the world can get out of us. I'm not done talking about Canada. I'm not done talking about the things that I feel passionate about right here at home. But all of our fates right now are intertwined with the foreign policy of the United States and things that are happening on the other side of the world. Things that we have very little influence over. I probably have more influence over those things than some of our politicians do, because I actually talk about them and people might actually hear me. And because they hear something I say, they might have a thought of their own and they may go on to make other decisions and say things, and maybe the ripple in the pond can actually have some influence. But first you have to talk about these things. You know, Polyev, for all him being the leader of the opposition, Has he ever really talked about the Freedom Convoy since he did his photo opportunity? Has he talked about the ridiculousness of how much resource we are dedicating to the prosecution of individuals? Well, criminals, hardened criminals, people who shoot and stab people, get turned loose, are free walking our streets? Does he talk about the injuries caused by the medical experiment? Does he actually do bold things? Or, as I've said before, is it just a snooze fest? It's kind of a snooze fest. We're all prisoners here. And I long for the day when there's some vision in political leadership, and maybe it'll never happen. I hope it does, that wants to take us in a different direction. I'm looking at Saskatchewan. I'm looking at Alberta. The potential's there. The people are there. The passion's there. But leadership either is unwilling or slow rolling or just lacks the bravery to take the final step and actually say, you know something? This federation sucks. Let's build something new. For all the talk about building Canada, we're not talking about rebuilding the federation that's rotted our potential. I'm Frank Vaughn. I'll see you in the next one.